22 past the hour. Welcome back to Morning Joe. Joining us now from Washington, former Republican Senator of South Carolina, Jim DeMint. Senator DeMint recently wrote about why he chose to leave the Senate and head to the Heritage Foundation. In the Washington Post, he wrote in part this: "The right ideas have the power to change the course of America, which is why the place to launch a conservative revival is the Heritage Foundation." It used to be said that Willie Mae's glove was where triples went to die. Well, Congress has become the place where good ideas go to die. In contrast, think tanks such as Heritage use objective analysis to discover why ideas work or don't. Conservative polities have proved their worth time and again. If we're not communicating in a way that makes sense, that clear, we are doing a disservice to our fellow citizens. We need to test the market and our message to communicate more effectively. And Senator Min, I guess the first question would be: do you apply that concept to guns?
Well, I've enjoyed hearing your discussion. The reason I left the Senate is politics is mostly about knee-jerk reactions and pretense. But as Tom Brokaw said just a few minutes ago, this country needs big ideas that unite us. And what we do at Heritage is focus on real substance and real solutions. And on issues like violence and keeping our children safer, what we try to do at Heritage and what we've been doing over the last several weeks is dig down and try to understand the real causes. And as you've all talked about today, the more you talk about it, the more you realize how complex the issue is. It involves cultural issues, it involves mental health issues, certainly violence and the tools that are used for it. So to jump straight to a solution is really political pretense. If we want to solve the problem, and I've got 4 grandchildren the ages of these children, and I used to help run an elementary school, and I've dealt with the safety issue, so it's very close to my heart. And we need to do something to make our children safer, our schools safer, but we can't do it with just knee-jerk political reaction. We've got to do it with discussions like you're having this morning. And I want to be a part of understanding the real causes so that we can make our country safer.
But Tom? Senator, I remember when you were growing up, I know how old you are. We didn't need military assault weapons in our society. We didn't have these kinds of school shootings. We didn't have the kind of carnage that we have in the middle of a lot of our urban areas that are going on. So how do we address that outside of the legislative process? How do we get the country engaged in saying enough? And was Newtown, in your judgment, a tipping point of some kind?
Well, Tom, it's a good question. It's one I ask myself, and I have been looking at the last century, and Heritage will come out with an initial discussion paper this week to really answer that type of question. Actually, mass shootings peaked in 1929, and certainly assault weapons were involved with that. A lot of that was in Chicago, organized crime. So this is not a new phenomenon. Last year we had a peak in the number of people who were killed in different incidences, but it's certainly not at an all-time high right now. It is a problem we have to deal with. And from the doors of the schools, which just like the studio I just walked in, I walked past pretty heavy security to get in here. I can guarantee you every school in the country is working now to make their schools safer. But we need to do something at the community, state, and federal level. It's a comprehensive plan, and every time something bad happens, I think it stirs us to do more. But I want to be a part of the solution, not just a political reaction. So I don't want to be out pretending that I understand what the right answer is.
All right.
But it's a discussion we have to have, and we need to do better.
So, Jim, we will invite you back after Heritage has its proposals. When you have a proposal in response to not only Newtown but the shootings across America, and we're not going to waste time right now trying to pin you down on a specific, because I think you've been quite clear this morning that you want to be part of the discussion, and you're not going to have any solutions today. That's fine. I want to expand this conversation, though, because a lot of people were fascinated when you left the Senate and wondered why you would leave the United States Senate to go to a think tank. And when Mika was just reading your statement, I was struck by what you were saying, how much it sounded like what so many senators that I talk to today say, especially senators who were governors first, who have told me to a person that the United States Senate is an abysmal place to work, that very little gets done, and it is not the Senate of old. Was that your experience?
Well, I don't think anything good is going to come out of Washington in the next few years. And the problem is, Joe, as you know, you've been there, we too often try to have national solutions when the solutions need to be at the community, the state level. The national government should focus on those things where there's a consensus nationally, where there's agreement. Going back to what Tom said, we need to focus on those ideas that pull us together. And I think I've made a difference in the Senate. I believe that we've got some great new senators that are going to change the tone. So I feel like we're going to make some progress there. But what I want to do is be part of a national discussion about positive, optimistic ideas that really solve problems, that make our country better. The Heritage Foundation has been doing that for 40 years, and they focused on getting good policies to lawmakers. I want to take that message directly to the American people. I want to showcase successes at the state level that are already working. The ideas that you and I and many on the set today believe in are actually working all across the country in different states in different ways. Right. And I think that's the way to pull people together.
Richard Us.
Well, what the senator is really saying is that think tanks are the generators of ideas, and I'd like to agree with that. The real question, though, is whether it's Heritage, the Council on Foreign Relations, Brookings, or anywhere else, whether the political system is open to them. So right now, we're going to be producing ideas. Heritage says they're going to do them on guns. Others are doing it on the fiscal problem. So you put it out. Do ideas stand a chance? Because at the end of the day, the Senate and the House are not debating societies. They're places where money and politics come to clash. Do ideas really stand a chance?
Well, let's look really quickly, though, at what happened with Chuck Hagel. Chuck Hagel's name was put out there. We heard immediately from the political class in Washington, Hagel was not going to pass. There was no way he was going to be confirmed. Well, think tanks weighed in. People associated with think tanks weighed in. And what was a dead nomination 2 weeks ago was now an inevitability today. So there can be some influence, right?
I'd like to think so. I mean, if you look at, say, workfare, that was an idea that was out there. Ideas about, say, privatizing Social Security came out of think tanks, places like Heritage. The push against Afghanistan, a lot of that was generated by people in the think tank world. I'd like to think that ideas in circulation actually really matter in this society.
Jim, Heritage used to have a lot bigger impact on the conservative movement than they have had in, let's say, the past 10 years. I think back to the mid-'90s where, as you know, Heritage was at the front. How do you revive Heritage standing in the conservative movement?
Actually, a lot of our work has been at the state level, encouraging education choice, encouraging freedom to work, where states that are bogged down with regulation and union barnacles are changing their laws so that it attracts businesses and create jobs and opportunities. So Heritage, if we take our message more to the American people and prove the things that we are talking about actually work, that's what puts pressure on Washington. I've seen the same thing in electing people to the Senate. The establishment in Washington said you couldn't elect a conservative from Pennsylvania, but if you take your message directly to the people, people like Pat Toomey can actually win elections. So I'm convinced that if we take the right ideas, the right message to the American people, they'll pressure Washington to do more, to pull things together that actually work for our country. So as Ronald Reagan used to say, if you can't make them see the light, make them feel the heat. And I want to make them feel the heat from the American people.
So, Senator, I'm just curious, because you've been on the inside and you're watching this gun debate from the outside of the halls of Congress, what you think about the NRA's response to everything since Newtown, and could they be a better part of the conversation, and obviously I have a very, opposing point of view compared to what they stand for, but could they be a better part of the conversation had they acted differently?
Well, probably all players could. If folks immediately jumped in on the left and the right, said, here's what we have to do, here's what we can't do. And I think what you're starting to do this morning, I think what we're doing all over the country is stepping back, trying to have a discussion to dig down and understand the root causes and how we can, over the short term and long term, create a safer country for our children and all of our citizens. But there are a lot of things we need to have discussions about. I'd hope this morning we could talk about another immediate issue in the Congress of the large debt and the laws that keep us from borrowing more money and how the both sides are responding. The things that we're talking about at Heritage, and I think is common sense to Americans, let's just put our country on a path to balance our budget over a 10-year period. That's not too much to ask. I think if we could come to that solution, that idea, you would find that we could work out the debt ceiling. We could put all this drama and theater aside. But anyone who thinks we don't ever need to balance our budget, I think has disqualified themselves from a discussion here. Well,
we will certainly continue that discussion, even though we didn't talk about it that much this morning. Moving forward, I think you and I certainly on that issue probably agree much on just about everything. So thank you so much. Jim DeMint.